Welcome, everyone, to today's episode of Getting In, a College Coach Conversation. I'm Sally Ganga from College Coach. For my second segment, I'll be talking with Karen Spencer, College Coach veteran and former admission officer, about letters of recommendation. There are some rules to this that not everyone is aware of, so be sure to listen in. I'm particularly excited about my third segment since the topic is really important. College Coach admissions expert Christine Kenyon and I will be discussing how to help students tune out the noise around them and find their best fit college. Students often feel enormous pressure to attend a name brand college, and we're here to help them figure out how to focus on what is the best fit for them instead. And for my first segment, I'll be chatting with Beth Feinberg Keenan, college finance expert, about looking at financial fit when selecting a college. Welcome, Beth.
Thanks so much, Sally, for having me today.
So let's start with, what does financial fit mean? I don't think people think about that too much. You know what I mean? I think they're like, am I going to get aid? Am I not going to get aid? How much am I going to get? So let's dive into, what do you mean by financial fit?
That's a great question, Sally. And I think it's a perfect starting place for this conversation. Financial fit is college affordability. And that's the basic definition. They're like, can you afford the school or the schools that your students being admitted to? And something that should be so clear to families is financial fit is different for every single family because every single family has, number one, different financial aid packages. Number two, they have different resources, whether it's how much they've saved, how much they can pay for college. And number three, like, what's the family willing or able to borrow? And I think it's all of those factors that make that decision, like what's financial fit for that family and how does it, really come down to, is that an affordable school or those affordable schools that your student is, trying to decide between?
I also think of it in terms of fit because different families can afford different things, you know?
You're right.
So that's what fit is about. It's like, how is it going to work for you? Not just, is it affordable for everyone? So,
Correct. It's so unique to the family.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And how do the numbers on aid packages fit into a student's and family's bottom line?
So when the families are getting financial aid packages, and this year definitely been an anomaly that some families haven't even received financial aid packages, but as you're getting them or you've received financial aid packages, you're looking at what was offered to you, like what are the components of the financial aid package, and when you're subtracting that aid from the cost of attendance, you're really coming down to figuring out, is this an affordable school for your family? And so you have to understand, like, what are the different components of that aid package, but it's looking at, what is the net price? I guess that's the best way to put it. What is the net price? What do you have to pay to the school? What are you going to owe, each that first year specifically?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And when you're thinking about covering that bottom line in terms of how much you can afford, is it how much you can afford? How much can you afford to borrow? Like, is that kind of how we're thinking about it?
So I think it's all of those things, Sally. I mean, it really is, because how much you could afford could be how much you've saved, because some families have the notion of, like, we've saved everything and that's what we're going to use to pay for college. Some families, it could be how much they've saved and how much they have in disposable income, like how much can they afford to pay from their cash flow. These are conversations that I'm having with families on a daily basis. Like yesterday, I was having that conversation that this family had some savings, and I asked them, like, okay, like, what can you pay for college? And I want families to dig a little bit deeper and figure out, are there expenses that they're paying for their students today? It
Mm-hmm.
could be that they're paying for club sports and travel sports. It could be that they're paying for competitive dance, competitive cheer, like whatever it is, music lessons. And they're not going to have those expenses when their student goes to college. So that can come into financial fit,
Mm-hmm.
because that income that they're spending, those dollars that they're spending on their student today, can be reallocated to college expenses. And that could free up some disposable income, and that goes into financial fit. And then for other families who haven't saved enough, who don't have enough disposable income, it comes down to borrowing. And for some families, it comes down to ability versus willingness to borrow, because some
Mm-hmm.
families are like, look, we have other financial goals, or we're very close to retirement,
Mm-hmm.
and we don't want to take on this additional debt, or we can't take on this additional debt. And some families are like, you know what, we're willing to borrow, but we also can't borrow 80 or $90,000 a year.
Mm-hmm.
So they have to figure out what fits in within their constraints. So is that $10,000 a year? Is that additional $20,000 a year? Or is it $80,000 a year that a family says, you know what? Hey, this is something that we plan for, we're able to borrow, and this is what we anticipate that we're going to borrow $80,000 a year. But I think it's really a mix of all of those things.
So let's dig a little bit deeper into a financial aid package. I mean, one of the things that I think it's really important for students and parents to think about is when they get gift aid, is it renewable? Is it just for 1 year? And I have had students who went to college on an initially very generous aid package and then didn't have it for
Yeah,
subsequent years. So, like, and had to leave in some cases.
that is a great point, Sally. And it's important to understand, why was that gift aid awarded to the student? Is it based on merit? And typically with that merit aid, it is renewable as long as the student meets X, Y, or Z. It might be that they can't change their major. It might mean that they have to maintain a certain GPA, but at least they know, like, it's not tied to the family's ability to pay. And that's fantastic. Like, as their income fluctuates or other changes happen in their family, they know that they're going to have that scholarship. But those families who get need-based aid, and it could be really attractive need-based grant money, I mean, things could happen, and that aid might change. And I'll use my cousin as an example. We've been talking, this past week a lot. Her daughter has some fantastic options for college, and she has the Chancellor Scholarship at Vanderbilt, which is full tuition. She knows what she's getting. She's going to get $65,000 a year. And her next choice is Penn. Again, another fantastic school. And she has $45,000 need-based aid from there.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, hey, like, that's what we've been talking about. Like, that Chancellor Scholarship isn't going anywhere. But as things change, like, your daughter could lose some of that need-based financial assistance that she was offered. And again, a $45,000 need-based grant is very generous, but you also likely want that for the 4 years that the student's in school.
Yeah, yeah. I know my nephew or my sister had to think about that for my nephew because when he applied to college, his father was unemployed. And so he got a more generous need-based aid package from one college and a more generous scholarship package from another
Right.
college. And, our colleague Alex Bickford was kindly speaking to my sister and said, I think you want the merit-based. Mind you, he had a rough first semester and I think it's worth noting that you do have to maintain a certain GPA, and he got close to losing it. I will say he went to Gettysburg College. It's a lovely place, and they reached out to him and said, "This is what you're at risk of. Which I don't think every college would do. So I'm shouting them out in a very grateful and
Oh,
positive way for doing that. So he's maintained his scholarship, but sometimes kids have bad semesters and he's doing better now, but one bad semester could have ruined it with a lower GPA. So check on that GPA requirement as well.
right. Because something that you don't necessarily think about is, if you lose that merit scholarship, maybe they can replace it with something else. And I want to say, about 8 times out of 10, maybe even 9 times out of 10, they're not replacing it with something else, because a lot of the families that we work with and we speak with, they often don't have any eligibility for need-based aids. That merit scholarship is really giving them that discount and bringing down that school where it does fit within their financial constraints.
Mm-hmm. And we've already started talking about things that could change the aid packages in the future, but let's go into a list of them. Like let's talk
Yeah.
about all of them, or
And
at
again,
least many of the big ones, I should say. Probably not time for all of them.
right. And again, this is a little bit where I dug into a conversation with my cousin over the phone, because her daughter, who's going to school this year, her older daughter will be in school for, they'll have 1 year of overlap.
Mhm.
And Penn is a school that is factoring both kids in school. And I said, well, when, you know, your older daughter graduates, you know, her aid is going to change.
Mhm.
And, I have her talking to Penn, and I said, call Penn and ask him that question. And they said, well, your aid is going to change. Well, what you're going to be expected to pay is going to change by about 40%. And
Mhm.
when we were talking, I said, you're likely going to lose about $20,000 of aid.
Mhm.
And that was huge. I mean, like $18,000.
Mhm.
Um, Dad is semi-retired. but dad has come back out of like retirement a little bit and he's making $50,000. And I'm like, okay, well, that's going to impact,
Mhm.
also that she could also lose aid for that. And then my cousin informed me, like, okay, like maybe like, if I were to change jobs, like if I were to change jobs and if I were to make more, like that's another factor. So
Mhm.
income is definitely a driving factor. Some of these schools that require the CSS profile and they're still factoring in for their institutional aid, multiple children in college, that
Mhm.
could change. That could change also the aid that your student's been offered that first year. Because remember, for your child's education, college for many is beyond 1 year. So while that financial aid package might look great that first year, especially with need-based financial assistance, you want to make sure that financial fit isn't only for year one, but it's for the
Mhm.
entire time that they're going to be getting their degree at that institution.
Yeah, yeah, very, very important. And I'm sure that with all the stress, like I've talked to parents, and they're like, "Oh, everything's fine now," and they want to just let it go. And I'm like, there's more to
Mhm.
think about. I'm sorry. Like, look into subsequent years too. So,
Right.
yeah,
And
yeah.
then the other thing that I like to, encourage families to keep in mind is when you're looking at financial fit, and this isn't something that's not going to change just for like that first student, but you need to plan for all of your kids. So if you have two children, you want to make sure that you're planning, I always say equally, because I hope
Hmm.
that they're planning equally, but maybe they're not. Or if you have three children, there's no buy two, get one free.
Hmm.
And financial fit has to work for all of your children. And you
Hmm.
can't assume that once you've put two kids through schools, colleges are going to commend you. Well, yeah, you've done a great job, but it doesn't mean that they have extra assistance for that third student because you have less resources.
Hmm.
So those are things to factor in, not only financial fit for that one, but for all of your kids, for all of the years that they're going to be in school.
Hmm. Hmm. Absolutely. And so any other expenses that you need to consider beyond those that are being charged by the college? Like there's the list of expenses, but we all know that kids are going to buy some pizza and there's going to be more. So, yeah.
Exactly. So there's definitely, their personal expenses and you can't negate those, but if they have personal expenses today, it's likely that they're going to have personal expenses, when they're off to college. But think about travel. Like that's huge.
Hmm.
Depending on how far your child is going away to college, it could be that you can drive them. Fantastic.
Hmm.
Then it's negligible. But if it's a flight away, especially if they're traveling at the holidays, because that's typically when students are going to and from school, flights are a little bit more expensive. If you as a parents want to visit your student during like a parent weekend, again, additional costs. If your student is somebody who wants to join a fraternity or sorority, I mean, you could anticipate maybe like words of like $3,000 to $5,000 in those expenses. And then other things that some families might not think about is if your students have any type of learning disabilities and they need any type of extra support, there could be expenses related to that you might be charged that are not covered by like a learning disability center. If they plan to have a car on campus, think about having a car on campus. So there's a lot of things that you might not think about that all add up. And you're not going to get a bill from the college for a lot of these things, but there's still things that you have to come up with for that college, I want to say experience, because that's the best way to
Hmm.
put it, that college experience.
Hmm. Hmm. Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much, Beth.
Thank you so much for having me today, Sally.
All right. When we return, I'll be welcoming Karen Spencer.